You say you believe in science, but what does that really mean? Do you believe in the quantum vacuum? Do you believe in superstring theory? Do you understand the tensor calculus behind general relativity? No, and that's not a personal failure. It's because science today is no longer something we understand. It's something we submit to. In the modern world, science has ceased to be a method. But let me be very clear. Real science, in its classical sense, was never a closed system. It was part of a greater structure of knowledge, ordered toward wisdom, not toward control, but toward contemplation, not toward efficiency, but toward meaning. That's why, in the Middle Ages, the highest form of knowledge wasn't physics, it wasn't biology, it wasn't even mathematics. It was metaphysics, the science of being as being. Why? Because without metaphysics, no other science has a foundation. You cannot ask what a thing is unless you have first understood being itself. And this is where we've gone terribly wrong. Modern science has amputated itself from its metaphysical roots. It studies effects without causes. It analyzes structure without substance. It measures, but no longer understands. René Guénon called this the reign of quantity, a regime where quality, essence, and symbol are all discarded in favor of what can be calculated and manipulated. In The Crisis of the Modern World, he wrote, "What characterizes our age is a kind of intellectual atrophy, a degeneration of true intellect into rationalism, and then into pure empiricism. Science no longer leads us to truth. It leads us only to power." But it wasn't always like this. In the medieval world, education was not about information. It was about formation, the shaping of the soul toward the logos. The famous division between the trivium and the quadrivium wasn't arbitrary. It was symbolic and ontological. The trivium trained the soul in word, reason, and meaning. Grammar, the structure of language. Logic, the structure of thought. Rhetoric, the structure of expression. Only after the soul was ordered in speech and thought could it proceed to the quadrivium, the mathematical disciplines, which revealed the order of the cosmos. Arithmetic, number in itself. Geometry, number in space. Music, number in time. Astronomy, number in motion. For the medieval mind, mathematics wasn't a tool. It was a window into the divine order. Music wasn't entertainment. It was the echo of cosmic harmony. Astronomy wasn't about space conquest. It was about discerning the language of the heavens. This is the cosmos described by Boethius, by St. Augustine, by St. Thomas Aquinas. A world suffused with logos, meaning proportion, form. A world in which science, art, and theology were not at war but in harmony. And this is precisely what Wolfgang Smith reminds us in his writings. Smith, a trained physicist and metaphysician, argues that modern science only sees a projected shadow of reality. It sees measurements, not essences. It sees data, not being. In The Quantum Enigma, he writes, "The so-called physical world is but the projection of reality onto the plane of measurement. That is, we confuse what we can measure with what is real. But not everything real is measurable. Not everything that matters can be put in an equation." Smith distinguishes between the corporeal world, the world as we experience it, and the physical world, the abstraction produced by science. The modern mind collapses the two, but the traditional mind kept them distinct and ordered. Symbolism was the bridge between them. In traditional thought, every visible thing was a sign of something invisible. A symbol, not in the modern sense of arbitrary code, but in the ancient sense of participation. The sun was not a ball of hydrogen. It was the visible image of divine light. The cross was not a shape. It was the axis of the world. This is what Guénon called the science of symbols, a knowledge that perceives the inner dimension of reality through form. It is what the ancient Greeks called mythos. It is the opposite of modern abstraction. It is concrete, because it sees the whole, not just the part. The modern world has reduced the cosmos to a system. The ancients saw it as a book, written by God, in a language of form, number, and proportion. We no longer know how to read that book, and so we try to rewrite it with code. The irony is that modern science rests on assumptions it cannot prove. As David Hume showed, it assumes the uniformity of nature, the reliability of induction, and the objectivity of the senses. But none of these are provable by science itself. They are metaphysical postulates. Without them, no experiment would make sense. But today, metaphysics is mocked, even though it's the only ground science can stand on. St. Thomas Aquinas taught that science is a habitus, a habit of the mind rooted in first principles. And those principles come not from data but from being, from metaphysics. Aristotle taught the same. The first science is not physics, it is philosophia prima, the wisdom of being as being. But modern man, obsessed with control, has turned away from wisdom. He wants prediction, not understanding. He wants manipulation, not truth. And so he builds technologies, while his soul collapses. This is the real crisis. If David Hume planted the seeds of doubt about the rational basis of induction, showing that there's no logical necessity for the future to resemble the past, then the 20th century reaped those seeds in full, as philosophers turned their gaze against the rising arrogance of modern science. Scientism, the belief that empirical science is the only valid form of knowledge, came under fire not from mystics or poets, but from philosophers of science themselves. Karl Popper was among the first to pick up Hume's challenge seriously. He acknowledged the problem of induction and argued that no number of observations could ever verify a theory. Scientific theories, according to Popper, are never confirmed, only tentatively accepted until they are falsified. True science, then, is not about establishing certainty, but about exposing our best theories to potential refutation. This alone subverts the core assumption of scientism, that science offers secure, absolute truth. Then came Thomas Kuhn, whose structure of scientific revolutions shattered the myth of linear scientific progress. Science, he argued, doesn't grow by accumulation of facts, but by paradigm shifts, radical, often irrational transformations in the worldview of scientists. These revolutions aren't governed by strict logic, but by shifts in consensus, perception, and even culture. Kuhn restored the human element to science, and by doing so, undermined the pretense of timeless objectivity. Paul Feyerabend took this further in Against Method, where he argued that the history of science shows a pattern of breaking the rules rather than following them. There is no single scientific method, he claimed, no universal set of procedures that ensures truth. Instead, progress often comes through creativity, rebellion, and contradiction. His famous slogan, "Anything goes," wasn't a call to chaos, but a defense of intellectual pluralism. Scientism, in his view, is not just wrong, it's dangerous. Imre Lakatos tried to mediate between Popper's rationalism and Kuhn's relativism with his concept of research programs, where theories are protected by a hard core of assumptions and surrounded by a belt of auxiliary hypotheses. These programs can degenerate or progress, but again, the process isn't simple or purely logical. Others, like Michael Polanyi and Stephen Toulmin, emphasized the tacit dimensions of science, the personal judgment, tradition, and cultural knowledge that underpin even the most technical inquiry. The common thread through all of these thinkers is clear. Science is not the final arbiter of reality. It is a human enterprise, shaped by presuppositions, philosophy, history, and even theology. And it must be judged not from within, but from beyond, from a philosophical standpoint that science itself cannot provide. Our crisis isn't the failure of science, but the loss of the sacred order, the loss of hierarchy, the loss of wonder. We don't need to abandon science. We need to restore its place, below philosophy, below theology, below the logos. Only then can science be what it was meant to be, a path to truth, not a system of control. So no, you don't really believe in science. You trust it. You use it. You delegate your confidence to those in white coats. And that's okay if you know its limits. But if you forget those limits, science becomes a false god. And false gods always betray. The way forward is not anti-scientific. It is transcendent. It is the recovery of the symbolic world, the rediscovery of metaphysics. The rebirth of the cosmos as a theophany, not a machine. Because you are not a machine, you are not a statistic, you are not a node in a system, you are a person, an image of the Logos, capable of truth, of beauty, of communion, and the world is not a resource to be exploited. It is a sign to be read, a temple to be entered. The sacred is not gone. We are just blind to it, but the eyes of the soul can still open. And when they do, the whole cosmos sings again.